I had the opportunity this morning to be in the Security Council of the United Nations. I represent an international organization, the International Anti-Corruption Academy, which has diplomatic status that would have allowed me to go. But I thought talking to you was more important because I couldn't influence what was happening there. And for me, it would just be a show. But here I get to shout over an audience in the next room. So I want to apologize for shouting because I don't know how to talk to a noisy crowd. But hopefully it's quieting down. So I want to talk about what I think are the most important things. And I want to start out with what I think is the most important thing. The most important thing is not how, but why. So if you forget why, you end up with the greatest problem of modernity, the forgotten why. So you end up with law without justice, art without beauty, philosophy without the pursuit of truth, financial systems without providing sustainable goods and services, religion without law, without love and transcendence, just rites, rituals, and dogmas, and weapons without security. The greatest paradox is the more we perfect the weapons, the less security we get. So since 2000, the nations of the world have spent in excess of $25 trillion based on a Roman motto from the 5th century, prepare for war, receive peace. Prepare for peace, receive war. This is in spite of what the diplomats of the world have negotiated, particularly in the nuclear non-proliferation regime, but the political class and the military thinkers and our economies have dominated our actual practice. So there's a big difference between the why and the how. The how of producing more deadly, more expensive, more usable, more modern weapons brings us less security. How did we get here? On top of that, to quote the Secretary General, the way in which we provide the goods and services of our society is at war with nature. And this is an audience of people who've come to understand that. I don't have to explain to this audience what the Anthropocene is. But since we're taping it, the Anthropocene is the time in which we live, in which two things are important. One is we now have the ability to end the human endeavor. We can do that. That couldn't have ever been done in human history before. We never had the choice as to whether we would be the last generation. We couldn't have melted the polar ice cap before. We couldn't have destroyed species at 1,000 times the evolutionary base rate before. We couldn't have done what we do and privilege to the point of subsidizing in trillions of dollars industries that are actually destroying the very living systems upon which we depend and of which we are but a thread. We couldn't have done that. We're in the Anthropocene because the human venture or experiment, maybe we're just an experiment, but I think we're a sacred creation. I think we're worth dedicating our lives to preserving. The human endeavor has forgotten that we are part of nature. And because of that, the more we perfect our domination of nature, the less we respect it, and the farther we go from sustainability. So we're at war with nature and we can't win. So we've set up methods of pursuing security amongst the institutions, our social institutions, states, which are leading us over the cliff. It's the wrong bus. And we are having a relationship to the natural world that's based on a myth, that we can control it and our influence will determine its future, as if we know what the purpose of creation is. We don't. I mean, if any of you were God, would you make platypuses? It's a mystery. So we need a little humility in the face of this mystery. We need a little respect for mystery. We don't know where we were before we were born, and we don't know where we're going to be a short while from now when our bodies dissolve. We don't know that. But to quote my political mentor, Senator Alan Cranston, we do know that on this sphere and infinite space is love. We do know that. We can see it in every child that's born, comes looking for it and immediately responding to their mother's love. And if they don't get it, they don't grow, they die. Every one of us came here looking for that love and that connection. And that's behind everything we do, because that, as Jesus said, that is God. So Muhammad called it compassion. Good idea to debate, compassion or love. How foolish have we become, right? So we've created institutions that determine how we're going to operate. They're called de jure institutions, institutions of law. But the institutions of law that dominate our world today were created really in the thinking of the 16th century. The state, for example, the modern state, was created in 1648 in the treaties of Westphalia. Why? What was the problem they were addressing? They weren't addressing protecting the climate. They weren't addressing weapons of mass destruction that could destroy the future. They were addressing the madness of people arguing over how Jesus' love could be best achieved. Protestants and Catholics were slaughtering each other in massive numbers in Central Europe, and they weren't going to stop. So people's ideas, people's debates over what is the best way to stop this perpetual war were really important. And I think we're in a similar moment in human history in which ideas matter profoundly. The ideas that go to the why matter profoundly, as they did at that time. We're in a period in which if we don't get it right with the environment and we don't get it right with weapons of mass destruction, we will not survive as a species, and all that we do for our love of our children will be in vain. So it's really important. Ideas matter, and gatherings like this, and I want to thank you so much for gathering us. Leaders on purpose, leaders for purpose, leaders who are thinking why is really important. And it's not enough just to have one day. We have to continue these conversations until we get it right. So we're at this moment. So the state was created to address that problem. The other major institution that defines our behavior, independently of our personal sentiments, independently of our personal realizations, independently of whether we have hearts without borders, we don't have nations without borders. Independently of how much generosity you have in your heart, if you're working in a corporate entity, it's the corporate bylaws that determine your existence. So how did the modern corporation get created? When did it get created? It was really in the beginning of the 17th century. You get the British East Indies Company and the Dutch East Indies Company, right? The first limited liability companies. Where did that come from? Who had the ideas about it? Well, you can go back and see like a guy like Hugo Grotius. Hugo Grotius was the philosopher of the modern state and the philosopher of the modern corporation. He said, I want to make it clear that the marketplace and the monastery can be equidistant to God. He felt that freedom of contract and freedom of commerce, if done fairly, would bring justice and wealth into the affairs of states and human beings. There's a lot of truth in this. He also was at the cusp of the Reformation and Protestant movement, that was based on the idea that the individual, you and me, all of us, have moral agency because we're individually blessed by God, and we don't have to go through an institution to realize our humanity. That's what the Protestant Revolution was about. It also had another aspect, which was the Holy Roman Empire dominated the capital markets. So you had, once they challenged that, you had this confluence of spiritual passion and insight, the value of my own life, and economic interest. So that's how the wealth of the modern age got created. So all of us here are people with the privilege of moral agency because of that thinking. But our corporate entities that were created by the concepts at that time did not include an insight of our impact on the natural world. And our state entities, our constitutions, the way in which we form states, did not take into consideration our global impact, our human security interest. It did not understand that. The United States Constitution, although it's based on the brilliant insight that all men and all human beings are created equal, did not have any global understanding because we didn't have a global impact at that time. But we do now. And we also know that it's not enough for corporations to only go to the bottom line. They have to actually also understand their relationship to the natural world. So these are institutions that we create. We create states, we create corporations, and they were created, the ones we're driving are electric cars on horse and buggy roads of another time. That's the dilemma we face right now. So the conversation has to change. The conversation on governance has to change. The conversation on corporate purpose. Not necessarily corporate purpose in this group, but how do we change the way in which the charters are done, the charters of our banking institutions, because these are de jure institutions. I say, love people, use things, and understand that our institutional structures are things. They're things. Our ideas are things. And thus we can change them. But when we love the things as ends in themselves and use people, we won't get it right. So here are some suggestions of things that I think we can make a difference in. One is the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations have to succeed because it's the only countervailing model to military nationalism, the burlesque expression of which we're seeing in the horrors of Ukraine. And the horrors that our country did in Iraq. But there's a difference. I want to just make a side comment. There's no moral equivalency between the lies and the illegality of our invasion of Iraq and the invasion of Ukraine. The main reason is this. We can criticize what the United States government did. We can criticize what the United Kingdom government did. But you can't do that in Russia. You'll get thrown off a 14-story window. All governments need to be criticized and make change. But in authoritarian systems, you can't do that. So there's no moral equivalency. There's one man made a decision to invade Ukraine, and you can't change that kind of a system. So we can make corrections in our country. So that's one, is we need to have a real conversation of what is human security, because the purpose of the state is to serve people, not people to serve the state. And that's what human security is about. Two, for the Sustainable Development Goals to be obtained, money is needed. When they were created, there was money. There wasn't COVID, there wasn't the war, but it's not there now. But there's $2 to $4 trillion bled from the productive economies of the world by tax evasion, tax avoidance, human trafficking, drug running, and all sorts of bribery, nefarious activities. And $2 to $4 trillion could be captured if we mainstream anti-corruption. And three, and I'm going to conclude with this. We've developed a technology that can melt the polar ice cap. It took hundreds of years to do this. It's more important now that we develop a technology to melt the human heart. That's all I want to leave with you. Thank you.